So don't worry, you're not crazy. I'm really using the Star Wars opening with the theme of 2000: A Space Odyssey, just because I don't want to get any trouble with John Williams. Welcome, everyone. So I know that you're coming from very far, far from outer space, and you came here to find a solution for a trouble you're facing today. Let me sum up what the problem is. Usually, in a software architecture, we put our business logic inside our backend. This is a best practice because we can have several consumers, like a responsive web application, several mobile applications such as iOS and Android-based application, backend calling our backends, and so on and so on. Here, I have represented a rail booking system. I have several features like performing a search for a train going to my destination or selecting a train with a fare. And because we don't put our users in front of our backends because they don't know how to speak JSON, right? We also develop frontends in which we will find also the features we have developed. And the frontend and the backends are on each side of the network. And to make sure that they can communicate with each other, in between we put something named REST. And REST has only 4 words of vocabulary. So they are create, read, update, and delete. So it means that on both sides of the network, we have developed features using the English natural language to express all the richness and the subtlety of our business domain. But to make sure that they can communicate with each other, we have to translate everything so a kindergartner child can understand, because he has only 4 words of vocabulary. It means that the front-end, when he wants to perform a search for trains on the back-end, he has to translate that to create a search resource. It also means that when the back-end receives that, it will translate it back into the business intent that was performing a search for train going to the destination of the user. Another example, selecting a train with a fare. That time we'll map it on an update of a sub-resource selection inside the search. And this is totally arbitrary, in fact, because we could have created directly a selection resource. And here we can ask ourselves if we are not a bit mad, because the user wants to search for a train going to his destination. He never asks you to create a search resource. But the thing is that your backend is exposing exactly an API saying, create a search resource, right? And I'm pretty sure that you can clearly see that so you can see that sentences are equivalent regarding REST, but we have a loss of meaning in the second use case. We no longer see any mention of train or destination because we have what we call an impedance mismatch because of that translation. I'm pretty sure that when you develop user stories, you rather like it to looks like I want to search for a train going to my destination than create a search resource. No? No? Yes? And if, unfortunately, your user story looks like create a search resource, I'm strongly advising you to fire your product owner. So here, as I said, there is a loss of meaning, and it comes from something in REST which is called the uniform interface. So to explain what is it, we have to be back before 2000, and at that time, if you wanted to talk with a backend on the network, the only thing you had was the HTTP protocol. But the way to use it was really specific to that backend. So in early 2000, REST came and said, OK, we will standardize a bit the thing, and we will say that on each backend, now we have resources. And we will handle the lifecycle of those resources using the CRUD paradigm. And we will map the HTTP method on that. So to create a resource, it will be a post. To read, it will be a get. To update, patch, or put. And to delete, delete. OK, great. But in 2000, Roy Fielding, the one who has formalized REST in his thesis, warned us about a problem coming from the uniform interface. He said that since the information is transferred in a standardized form, rather than a form which fits the needs of the application, we will degrade the efficiency of the system. So in a way, he told us there that he warned us about that loss of meaning, because it's quite difficult to express everything we can with the English language with 4 verbs. I think you quite agree that. It also means that if you take the black hole here in the back, and you say that this is the uniform interface face in REST, and the astronaut in the front, let's say this is the business intent of your backend. The business intent of the backend is just engulfed in the REST API because we are just exposing a CRUD API. So I didn't introduce myself. My name is Julien Topçu. I'm a technical coach at Shodo, which is a French consultancy company. And at Shodo, we created a startup named Colombiad Express, which helps people to travel from the Earth to the moon. Yes, because we didn't know what to invent to get French public funds for innovation, which are tax-free, by the way. So as you can imagine, that startup doesn't really exist, but this is the domain we'll explore today, on which I've applied an ancient technique, which is 20 years old, that will help you to bring back the business intent into your REST API. So you will see that it really looks like a rail booking system. That's not so weird because I used to work at Expedia on the rail booking system. This is where I've applied that technique. So here we have a search form. You can say if you want to do a one-way or a round trip, you have to select the departure spaceport. Here it will be the JFK Space Center. I would like to go to Mare Cognitum on the moon. If I hit search, I will then have all the possible outbound space trains to the moon. And for each of them, I have some fares I can select. So let's select the first fare, the first class fare, on the first outbound. By doing that, you can see that the panel on the right has changed, and now you can see the selection I've made. There is also a book button, which is not enabled yet, because my selection is not complete. I want to do a round trip, so I have now to select an inbound train. When I've selected the outbound train, the rest of the UI has changed as well. As you can see here, I only have inbound trains, which are compatible with the outbound I've selected. If I select one of them, my selection will be completed, and I can click the book button to book my trip. You can see also that with Colombiad Express, you can do round trip to the moon, for only 400 euros. Let's say that we will never become a unicorn and we won't last long. So this is the domain we will explore today, on which I have applied that technique that will help you to bring back the business intent in your APIs. And that technique has also a really good side effect. At that time, this is purely technical. You will see that will be the best demonstration you will ever see in REST, and now I have some pressure. OK, so I would like to show you what is happening on the network when the front end wants to retrieve the outbound trains. OK, so I'm opening here the developer tools. I'm refreshing the page, and this is the request I'm looking for. So here, what we can see, I have a URL saying that the front end wants to get a particular search. So search is my aggregate. I have searches and the ID of the search. And then he wants to retrieve the space train, which is a sub-collection of the search. And because he wants to only display the outbound, there is a request parameter named bound. OK. So for the rest of the demonstration, we will go now to Postman, because it will be more readable. First thing I have to do is to create a search, and then I will replicate exactly the request I just showed you. OK, this is exactly the same thing. As you can see, bound equal outbound. Is that big enough? Yes? So let's imagine now that my product owner said to me that we are opening the Mars market. And by doing that, we will offer the multi-destination feature to our users. It means that now they will be able to do travel that goes from the Earth, then to the Moon, then to Mars, and going back to Earth. And in that kind of travel, outbound and inbound doesn't mean anything. We rather like to talk about the first journey, the second one, and so on, until the last one. And because he can do as many journeys he wants, in fact. So I've been asked to do that change on my backend, which also have an impact on my API. So here, this is the code of the backend. It has been developed using Kotlin and Spring Boot, but that doesn't really important for the rest of the talk. You just have to know that here, this is the controller. I have the route to retrieve the SpaceChain. And as you can see, here I have the request parameter named bound, which is, in fact, an enumeration that can be outbound or inbound. I will change that because the business has changed. Now it will be a journey index, and the type will be moved to integer. Because I don't want to develop the whole multi-destination feature, I will just, for now, convert it back to a bound. It means that when the journey index is 0, it will be outbound, and the journey index is 1, it will be inbound. OK, so let's restart now my backend. What is the impact of my modification? Sorry? Yes, I have broken the API, in fact, because I have changed the request parameter. That's quite easy to check. So let's try back here in Postman. I'm creating a search, and now I will retrieve the outbound train from it. And as you can see, I have a bad request, because the backend said it expects something named journey index. So it means that all the consumers, they have to change the request to make sure that instead of a bound, they will use a journey index. And if you're not lucky, they are not in the same team as you and in another company. And they all have to do that change. So now they can retrieve the outbounds. So we just demonstrated that if you change the URLs and the request parameter, you break your API. But you know that already, right? No? I hope so. OK, that's not the biggest part of the demonstration. In fact, my frontend is running here in a node process. It has been developed using JavaScript and React. And you quite agree that I never changed any piece of code of JavaScript. And I never restarted the frontend in that node process. So let's see the impact on the frontend, which is still up and running there. OK. So I will try to retrieve some outbound trains for a search. Do you think it will work or not? Who doesn't think it won't work? Oh, that's the majority of the people there. Let's see. It works. How can that be possible? Let's see what is happening on the network. If I refresh the page, you can see that, in fact, my frontend was smart enough to do the change for me without having to change any piece of code. He knew that he has to change for journey index equals 0. And that's a better demonstration. No? You want to know how it works? OK. So this is thanks to the technique that will help you to craft the domain-driven web APIs using REST. So in fact, you have to know that we already have everything in REST to do such things. But there are 4 problems that are preventing us from doing so. The first one, so you will see that talk is really between REST and domain-driven design. The first problem is regarding REST. The first problem is that we all have false beliefs regarding REST. Let me explain you that. So here, I have one feature that helps you to create a booking from a selection. OK? So that's a domain service. This is your feature. If you want to map that in REST, what kind of HTTP method you will use? Post, because you are creating a resource, a new booking. And what will be the base URL you will use? Sorry? Bookings, yes. Usually people are doing that. Let's imagine now another domain service, rebook SpaceChain. It helps you to rebook the same train at another date from an existing booking. So you don't have to put everything which are specific to a criteria. You just know that that train has the same schedule every week, at the same date, at the same time, So here you take an existing booking, you put another date, a new date, and create a new booking. On which HTTP method and base URL you will map that? So it won't be a put or a patch, because put or patch will update the existing booking. I don't want to update that. I want to create a new one from the existing one. So it will be a post. And the URL? Alors, you have several choices. Most of the time, because people organized their endpoints regarding resources, they also do such things. So in that case, they will also use post bookings. And here you can see the smell, because we have two different use cases, and it's quite on the same endpoint, and it's quite difficult to know what is the difference. In the first request, we want to book something from a selection. You can see that in the payload, we don't have any mention of the selection, because the selection is a sub-resource of the search, and this is unique. So the only thing you need is the ID of the aggregate, which is the search ID. So here, once again, there is a loss of selection, even though the business intent is I want to book what I have selected. In the second use case, we have a semantic confusion with the previous one. Yes?
Looks like a controller in REST nomenclature. So why won't we do it like bookings, then booking ID,
Yes?
and then rebook?
We'll talk about that just after. OK. But usually people are doing such things, and here you have a semantic confusion with the previous use case, because they are on the same endpoint, and the only things that make the difference is the content of the payload. So to avoid that, some people, what they are doing, in the second use case, they will do post-rebookings. So it can work, but not in my case. The reason is that rebooking is an action and not an entity. What does it mean? It means that for the business people, you have two different ways to create a booking from a selection or an existing booking. But once created, this is exactly the same thing. If you say that you have two different entities, it could mean that they are different, and it could mean also that they don't have the same life cycle, which is not true. And if you talk with the business people, they never talk about rebooking. They only talk about booking. And the only reason why here we have that post-rebookings is because of REST. And REST must not lead the design of your business domain. That's really important. And if you are doing clean architecture, you know that already, that it should not modelize, have an influence of the modeling of your domain. Because you could have used something else, like a message queue. And by doing that, you wouldn't have that problem, right? So that's why we should not do such things. Furthermore, rebooking sounds like pseudo-functional. So it means that we can confuse the business people. OK, the developers talk about rebookings. It looks like it was different than a booking. Why? So, and if you know really well about ubiquitous language, if we have two different words to design exactly the same concept in the same bounded context, it's really a mistake. So we should not do that. So what I'm proposing you to do, and this is quite your solution, in fact, is to be aligned with what the business wants to do. So let's see what the user is doing. He's actually on his booking, he wants to rebook it. So let's do the same thing. In the URL, I have bookings with the ID, so the actual booking I want to rebook. And I had something which is called a classifier slash rebook in the URL. And I'm quite sure that now, all of you, when you read that URL, you all know what is the business intent of that URL, right? With post-booking, you don't really know. You just know that you want to create a resource, but in which use case, you don't know. And I still have to comply with the uninformed interface in that case, so it means that since I'm creating a new booking, I still have to use a post on that URL. And once created, it will be retrieved like any other booking on get booking with the ID and exactly the same content. So now we are really happy because it really aligns with what the user, the business wants. Two ways to create a booking, post-booking, ID rebook, and then the life cycle will be exactly the same, and you have the get bookings, okay? But maybe it bothers some of you, because some of you have heard that we cannot use verbs in REST. Is that true? Yes, some of you. So you have to know that this is a false debate. Why? If you take a look at the Roy Fielding thesis, he will not say to you how to build your URLs. There's no mention about that. There is some constraint. It has to uniquely represent one representation of your resource. It has to last long. It has to be unique, and so on. But how to build that, there's no mention of that. And that's quite sure that in the industry, we are using that nomenclature that say you are using as the base URL the name of your aggregate as a collection, then you append the ID, then you append a sub-resource, and so on and so on. OK, this is a help that we are all using, but this is not, a rule, in fact. And you can use verbs in URL. The only thing you can't do is to use verbs which are at odds with the HTTP method. It means that you can't do get create. That's confusing. What is the expected behavior of get create? Get should read some data, and you have create in the URL, so will it create something? That's a mistake. This is the only thing you can't do. And furthermore, there's something really interesting in the Roy Fielding thesis. He goes further because he said that at no time your server or your client need to know or understand the meaning of a URL. Wow. And you know what? If your client doesn't know how to build a URL, this is one of the secrets of the magic trick I just showed you at the beginning. But I'm quite sure that we all build clients such as, the base URL is searches. If I appending the ID, I will retrieve a particular search. And if I want to get the selection inside it, I will append with concatenation / selection, right? But we should not do that. If you make sure that your client doesn't know how to build a URL, he won't be impacted if you change the API. That's normal because he will never be able to call the backend. No? So how the front end can call the backend if it doesn't know how to build a URL? So we'll see that in the last part of the talk, because there is a mean, in fact. But now we will be back to domain-driven design. Because the second problem that preventing us from crafting domain-driven web APIs is that we are mostly confusing the model and the business. What does it mean? The business is exactly what the user is doing. Here, for example, when she wants to select a train with a fare, she's on the outbound trains, and she clicks on the fare of the train she wants. That's the business, okay, the business intent. On the back end, I have the model. This is the way I have solved the problem. This is the way I've organized my code. So here I have a search aggregate in which I have a list of SpaceChain, which can be, this is a list of entities, which can be outbound or inbound SpaceChain. I also have a value object selection in which I will store all the train numbers which has been selected. Okay, that's a way to solve that problem. But I could have done something else. I could have used Booleans on all the SpaceChain and say, OK, this one is selected. And each time the user changes her selection, I have to synchronize all the Booleans. That is working also, right? But the thing is that when we want to expose that on the network, we just are using the implementation of the domain as it. And the web API will be aligned with the structure of your code, and that's a mistake. Because we should know that the modeling of a domain is something that doesn't last long. This is just there to, fix a particular problem at a certain period of time. You make an evolution, your model will change as well. If your web API is really aligned with your model, it means that your consumer will be coupled with your model. It means that they will be coupled with the implementation of the model instead of the behavior, instead of the business intent. So that's why usually here, that's a bad idea. Because here, this is really aligned with that patch on the sub-resource selection to select a train with a fare. This is just because we just align with the structure of the code. And once again, the user wants to select a fare on a train. But your API say, OK, update a sub-resource selection in the search. This is not exactly the business intent, even though your domain has something, a domain service, for example, which helps you to select a fare on the train. And doing such REST APIs, in the worst case, if you don't have a UX researcher and the domain might not be trivial, you can have a really bad user experience because it will be driven by the API most of the time. But don't worry, that doesn't happen much. Most of the time, this is what we have, a really beautiful front-end and an ugly back-end. Why? Because the front-end still have to comply with the business intent. It has no choice. He won't say to the user, OK, update your sub-resource selection in the search. Never. It will display the train and so on, and let the user select the fare. But on the API, we have something which is CRUD-oriented. So it means that the front-end and all the consumers will have to translate it to that patch of the sub-resource selection in the search, right? And it also means that all the consumer has to do that. And for me, this is accidental complexity, because this is extra work that all the consumer has to do. This is what I'm calling accidental complexity of adaptation. And this is because we are exposing our model instead of our behaviors in REST. So the answer of that is quite easy to say. We will take that adaptation and encapsulate it inside the backend. And instead of exposing the structure of the code, we will expose a behavior. OK, but how can we do that? Because there is a problem with REST. There is a problem with encapsulation. You all know what encapsulation means? There's some people that doesn't know what encapsulation means. OK, so to explain that really quickly, here I have a class which has only attributes, ID, criteria, SpaceChain selection, and then I only have getter setters. That's all. There is no behavior on that class. So it means that all the other classes which are using the search will be responsible for the business logic of the search. It also means that they have to make sure that the search remains in a consistent state each time it changes the state of the search. And it also means that it will be duplicated, those logic, on all the consumer of the search class. Because let's imagine that you have performed a search from Paris to Amsterdam. So it means that your criteria say your departure is Paris, your arrival is Amsterdam. And all the train goes from Paris and go to Amsterdam. If now you do set criteria and you change the destination to London and you leave it as it, now you will have a search in an inconsistent state because the criteria said that you are going to London, but the train remains going to Amsterdam from the previous search. So it also means that all the consumers of that class will have to do defensive code because they cannot be sure that someone has made some changes in a way that the search is valid, right? This is what Martin Fowler is calling an anemic domain, because you don't have any behavior attached to the class. In object-oriented paradigm, we use encapsulation. And this is something we really like in domain-driven design as well, because we want to encapsulate the state and expose behaviors through functions. And those functions will make sure that every change which is made on the search will be made in a consistent way. So if I want to change the destination, I will have a function named change destination, and that function will reset all the trains to make sure that the search remains in a consistent state. Okay. So for example, here I have an aggregate with the search, and I have a select space train with fare function. So do some people code like that? Yes? No? No? You only have an anemic model? You don't have any function in your aggregate or your value object and so on? Okay. So you have to know that this is the best. In fact, this is one of the pillars of the object-oriented paradigm. But maybe you're not doing object-oriented paradigm. That's why. I hope so. And the problem is that when you want to expose that on the network, the only thing you can do is to serialize every field. What can you do about the function of your class? What can you do about your domain services? Here, I can just have all the serialization of the fields. So it also means that the consumer, they have a kind of super getter-setters and do with the CRUD, with pod, put, patch, get, and delete, modification on all the fields. So now, even if your domain is encapsulated, the consumer has everything to de-encapsulate. So it means that with REST, we de-encapsulate the behaviors and we only expose states. Once again, we are mad. Because if you think about it, when you are doing domain-driven design, in the backend, we want to put a business logic, a domain. And on each side of the domain, you have what? You have REST, which is CRUD-based. And on the other side, you have the database, which is CRUD-based as well. You are doing SQL or NoSQL, this is a CRUD, right? And it can be really, it will be more easy if the domain is CRUD-based as well, because everything would have been CRUD-based. And if we do such things, why we can't use things like, Postgres REST, which is exposing for you all your tables as a REST API, and no code will kill us all? No. We can't do that because we can't put complex business logic in a database. We have to develop a backend with that business logic. And it means that that business logic must be also in your API. But this is something that are quite hard to do with CRUD. But maybe I didn't explain you what CRUD really means. Do you know what CRUD means? I'm not sure. Sorry? No, it's completely ridiculous and uses domain-driven design. Everything in the developer's life is CRUD, so why do we bother with domain-driven design? So don't worry, we'll see how to go over that. Just one little thing regarding the encapsulation in REST. If you remember the time when I had two endpoints on the same endpoint, for two different use cases, the only way I have to do the difference is through the payload. So here, this is a proof that we have to spend some cognitive load to reconstruct the meaning of the request. That's the encapsulation. So if I sum up the problem, what the user is doing, she wants to take a train with a fare. This is what she do. Usually, people exposes some requests like that to update a sub-resource selection in the search. And here, I'm using Json Patch. So if you don't know what is Json Patch, It helped me to do atomic operation on each field. And it helped me also to say what kind of operation I can do. Because with put, you will change the whole sub-resource. You cannot do anything else. So here, I specify that I want to add, in the subpath selected SpaceChain in the selection, the train number and the fare code the user has selected. OK. Here we have two problems. First thing, I've said that already, accidental complexity of the adaptation. All the consumer will have to make the translation between the business intent and that CRUD API. Second thing, you all had to read the payload to understand what was going on. Because I could have done something else. I could have put some parameters to be able to select a seat near the aisle or near the window. So here we have also the encapsulation. You spend some time to understand what was going on there. So I will take now my magic stick, and I will solve all the problems, OK? And this is the only request I need. In fact, I will align with what the user wants to do. She wants to, inside a search ID, select a SpaceChain, so let's be on that SpaceChain number. Then a specific fare code to select, so fare code and /select. And here, I'm quite sure that in less than 3 seconds, you all understand what is the meaning of that URL. And this is purely equivalent to that, in fact. But that is more business-oriented. I still have to comply with the uniform interface. So here, I still have to use a post because I'm creating a selection. And regarding the backend, I won't change anything. The model will remain the same. The only thing I will have to change is that now I have that adaptation in the controller part. I have to do that translation between the URL and the way my domain is organized. If you are doing hexagonal architecture, some of you are doing that or not. Yes, some of you. You know that you have something which is called the adapter on the left, which helps you to do such things. OK, but maybe some of you see that it remains a big problem there. Because I'm just keeping to explain how to build URLs. But what did I say? The client must not know how to build them, OK? OK, so how the front end can know that it can call that URL? That's the big question. To solve that, you have to understand that it will link to something which is the last problem. And that last problem is that we all build Anemic API regarding the workflow. OK, what does it mean? I have here an event storming that represents the two flows of my backend. OK, the one-way search, the round trip. Now, I have represented the round trip regarding my API. First thing, I'm creating a search by giving as the payload the criteria of the user. Then I will retrieve the outbound. Then I'm selecting one of them. I'm getting the inbound. I'm selecting one of them. And since my selection is complete, I can click the booking. Now, one question for you. From the API's perspective only, how can you know that you have to proceed in that order? You can't. If you take a look at your code, mostly those are different methods of a controller, which are independent. So in fact, your REST API is only exposing sub-steps of workflow, but never the workflow. It also means that what is preventing the front end from displaying the inbound trains before the outbound ones? Nothing, because you know the API. What will prevent the front end from trying to retrieve the inbound trains for one trip? That doesn't mean anything, but since you know how to build the URLs and the API, he can try to do that. He can also try to create a booking even if the selection is not complete. He knows post bookings, right? And the only reason why he can do that is because our APIs are anemic regarding the workflow. the only people implementing the business workflow are the consumers. The orchestration of your API, that's the consumer. The whole workflow to select a train and book it, the consumers only. You don't have it in your backend. Even though maybe you have developed a domain-specific language, okay, but the orchestration of that is never used anywhere. And business domain, business workflow is business, right? And this may be one of the most important things in a domain, right? So it means that one of the biggest parts of the business is leaking to your consumers and are duplicated everywhere. You also have other problems like this. Here, for example, if I want to display the booking button, I have to make sure that if I'm in a round trip, I have selected the outbound and the inbound. This is business logic. This is the meaning of a completed selection for a round trip. This is a post-condition of invariant. You have this is something that you will implement on the backend as well, but this is duplicated in the front end. So it means that too much logic still on the consumers. So how we will solve that? We will take all the business logic and encapsulate it in the backend, but that time with the workflow inside the API. Oh, the workflow in the API. How can we do that? Did you heard about the Richardson maturity model? Yes, some of you. So Richardson has categorized REST APIs in 4 levels. The first one, level 0, you're not REST. OK. Level 1, you have resources. Level 2, you are using the HTTP verbs to handle the lifecycle of those resources. And people stop there. But from the very beginning of REST, there is another level named the hypermedia control. And this is where we will find, in fact, the solution of all the technical problems we have with REST. So the hypermedia control has a really ugly name, which is HATOS. It means hypermedia as the engine of the application state. And I really like engine of the application state because it really sounds like, you know, something, a behavioral engine, you know. And what is HATOS? This is a linking system that will allow you to expose the relationship between your domain objects, discover the domain, and being able to encapsulate the business workflow. So I will do a little demonstration of that because my API is developed with it. So the only thing the consumer needs to know is the first URL to contact the backend. Here, it will be the creation of my main aggregate, which is the search. It has to give me the user input, which are the criteria, such as the departure spaceport, the arrival spaceport, and the schedule. I will send that to the backend. Usually, what are people doing? They serialize the whole search in the response. It means that I should see in the search the criteria, the SpaceChain, inbound and outbound ones, the selection, and so on. If you take a look at the payload, you will see here that we have indeed the criteria, and that's all. You won't see any selection and so on. Instead of that, you have a set of links. And each link have a semantic name, for example, here, selection, and a URL. It means that if you want to retrieve the selection of that search, you take the link name selection, you take the URL beside, and you request it as it. You don't have to know how this is built. And now I'm inside the selection. You can see that for now, I don't have any SpaceChain selected. There is a special link named self, which helps you to understand in which resource you are. And self here, you can see that this is a selection. It will help you to retrieve it back if you do a refresh, for example. And here I have also another link named search. It will help me to go back to the search. So I can take it as it. By default, when I click on Postman, it does some gets. So all the links I have, they have to comply with the uniform interface. So if I want to retrieve some data, it will be a get, okay? And here I'm back to the search. So you can see that now we are able to explain what are the relationships between the object and to navigate through the APIs. But we can do fancier stuff. If you remember, I have a sub-collection of SpaceChain. They can be outbound and inbound SpaceChain. In the first version, my consumer asked me to give him back only the outbound ones because he was putting that bound equal outbound, okay? Now, I have just a link named all outbounds. Okay, so if you want to get all outbound, it takes the URL as it doesn't read it, and it requests it, and you will get the outbound. This is the reason why, if you change the URL, it won't have an impact on the consumer. Because the consumer will be coupled with a semantic name, which is all outbound. This is business. If you change that, it means you change the business, so that's quite OK to change the consumer. But just changing the implementation of the URL each time, you know, that's purely technical, so you should not impact your consumer. And why it's working? Because as you have seen, in fact, the backend is serializing the request in the payload itself. So it will avoid a lot of cognitive load for the developers of the front end. They just have to know that they have to get that URL as it. And they don't have to bother about, you know, here we have only selectable equals to false. Why? You don't care. The backend needs it, he serialized it for you. OK. So with that URL now, I'm able to retrieve all the outbound. And you can see that near to the fare of that outbound, I have a link named select. It means that if I want to select that fare on that train, I take once again the link. So here I'm creating a selection, so it will be a post. And I do a post. So now I have created a selection. And you can see here that in the selection, I have an outbound train with the fare I've selected. This is the total price of my selection. And to be sure that you are inside the selection, the self-link points to selection. Great. And we have also something nice here. There is a new link named create booking. So it means that the backend, when he wants to serialize the search, he has detected that the selection is complete. So he proposes you to book. And you don't have any logic on the front end to understand if you are in a state that allows you to book. And the only thing you have to do in the front end to know if you can display the booking button is to make sure that the link is there in the response. That's the only thing you need to do. So if I want to create the booking, and just to show you, the first time we retrieved the selection, it was there, it was empty, and there is no create booking link here. So if I want to create a booking, quite easy, once again, because I'm creating a booking, it will be a post. I'm doing a post on that URL, and that's done. Okay? So it means that we are able to lead the workflow from the backend. The backend say to the front end, this is the next step. There are several next steps possible. Do what you want. And you're sure that your front end won't make any mistake, because it will only call the URLs that the backend give back to him. We can go further as well. For example, this is the round-trip use case. So in that case, I will have two journeys as criteria, the outbound and the inbound. Okay. And here, in the response, I have a new link named all inbounds. The only reason why I've displayed that, it was just to show you the difference with journey index equal 0 and journey index equal 1. Once again, the consumer doesn't know what means journey index. You just have to take that URL. There is, like I said before, something called Uninsectable set to false. Why? I will explain you just for you. Here, I will retrieve all the outbounds. OK. I will now select one of them. We already seen that. That's why I'm a bit quick with that. Now I am inside the selection. So because this is a round trip, you won't have any create booking link because my selection is not yet complete, right? Instead of that, I have a new link named inbound for current selection. It means that if you want an inbound which is compatible with what you just have selected, you call that URL. And the difference with all inbound is that all inbounds are all the possible inbounds without taking care of what you have selected. So they may not be compatible with your outbound. That's why here we have only selectable to false and only selectable to true. That's the main difference. If you go to the inbound which are not selectable, if you want to force a selection, you can see here as well there is something named reset selection to true. With that, we ensure that the search will remain in a consistent state, and the front end cannot, select an inbound which are not compatible with the outbound. Because if you want to select that outbound, that inbound, the outbound will be trashed from the selection. You can no longer see it here, and you have a new link which is outbound for current selection. Because he knows that, okay, if you want to book, you still have to select the outbound now, which is compatible with the inbound you have selected. So if I go to that link to retrieve the compatible outbounds, you can see that reset selection is set to false. So that time, if I select that train, it won't reset the selection, and my selection will be complete. So outbound, inbound, and now I have the create booking link. So you see how much we can do with that. We can really lead the whole workflow, and we avoid a lot of cognitive load from the front end, because this is all the logic is serialized inside the payload. And my backend, this is really important, is still stateless. This is at the time of the serialization that he makes some computation to understand what are the next steps and creating those URLs. But I don't have any session for that. That's really important. OK. Some people knew already that or not? Some people knew already that? Great. Are you using that in production? Less people. So this is really something that we use at Expedia for the rail booking system. So the links are, this is something that the front end, your consumer, must not try to understand. And if you ensure that, it will offer you a better decoupling between the consumption of your API and the implementation of your business domain. It's exactly what I've showed you. So the REST impedance mismatch we had that was preventing us from crafting domain-driven web APIs was due to the fact that we had false beliefs regarding REST. Some people think that we cannot use verbs, but verbs enrich the semantic of the API. The only thing you can't do is to do get create. The other problem was a straight exposition of our model inside the API. That was the structure. Instead of that, we should expose behaviors, so create a consumption-oriented adaptation on the backend. We were exposing directly the state of the domain object because we didn't have anything to serialize the function. And with 8OS, now we can serialize the function inside the payload. Furthermore, with 8OS, now we can drive the workflow of the API with that hide and seek game with the link. If you cannot do that action, it won't be serialized in the payload. So the front end cannot do any mistake. And now we have a workflow-oriented web API. And with all that, you will get back the business intent inside your REST API. Thank you very much. That's all for me. You can scan that QR code if you want the repository.